us tonight. Before we get started, we just want to start off with a few housekeeping notes. So as an attendee to this webinar, you'll be able to listen with your computer audio. Alternatively, you could also use the number on the screen and webinar ID associated with this meeting. Today's session will also be recorded to be available for viewing post-event, and it will be posted on our website. If you have any questions at any time during the presentation, please post them in the Q&A portal at the bottom of your toolbar. If you would like to ask your question verbally, please use the raise hand feature and we will go ahead and unmute you to take your question. We highly encourage you to refrain from using the chat to enter your questions, just so that it is easier to keep track of the questions and have them all answered. And if you are calling in by phone tonight, just dial the number *9 to raise your hand if you're on the phone, and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Next slide, please. And we will be following along. All the information in this workshop are found on our standard grants guidelines, which can be found in this link that I'll have in the chat. I just sent it in the chat, and you can follow along by downloading that file. Okay, and next slide. Cool. And I'll pass it on to Amy.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight. Welcome to the 2002 Safe Clean Water Grants Informational Workshop. My name is Amy Fonseca. I'm a Senior Management Analyst with the Grants and Partnership team, and we are super excited to share this year's funding opportunities with you. We will give some tips along the way and help you develop a stronger proposal. But first, I'd like to introduce our new grants team. We do have some new staff. Some of you may know us if you're a current grantee, but some of you may be new and seeing us for the first time. So I will go ahead and pass it to Peggy.
Good evening, everyone. Peggy Lamb. I'm a management analyst in the grants program. I primarily help out with mini grants, so some of you guys here are familiar. I'm seeing some familiar names. So welcome everyone to the grants workshop. I'll pass it to Albert.
All right, thank you, Peggy. Albert Lay here. I'm a grants and partnership analyst with the team. I back up Peggy on the mini grants, but I'm also leading the future water bottle filling station grant program as well. And I'll pass it back to Robert.
Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Marmito, and I'm the Community Benefits Intern working with the Grants and Partnerships program. I've been involved with helping with social media posts and outreach pieces. And yeah, I'm excited for you all to be here. And yeah, I'll pass it back to Amy.
Great. And we do have a couple team members that unfortunately weren't able to make it today, but that would be Renee Moreno, and he's our management analyst, and Kristen Yasakawa, who's our supervising program administrator. And if you're a grantee with us currently, then you probably know those familiar faces. So I will go over the agenda really quick. Next slide. As you can see, we have a packed agenda, so we'll try to go through it quickly, but do remember that at any time you can ask questions. The best way to do that is to go ahead and put it in the chat below. I'm sorry, not the chat, the Q&A box, the question and answer box. We encourage you to follow along with the standard guidelines, which Robert had mentioned earlier, that is on our website, and that is the document that you'll use to put your proposal together. It has all of the information that you need, including the eligibility requirements, the scoring criteria, and the different types of grants we're offering this year. So do go ahead and take a look at that. That's going to be a really important document. So I'll go ahead and pass it on to Albert.
All right, the mute button is always elusive on these things. All right, thank you all for joining us. For those who are unfamiliar with us, we're the Santa Clara Valley Water District. We're also now known as Valley Water. We had a rebranding a couple of years ago, and we helped make the name a little shorter for easier to say. Valley Water is a public agency. It's a special district within the state of California. We're most known as a wholesale drinking water provider for the county, but we also manage the region's flood protection activities. And so the third thing we also do is working to help create healthy creeks and ecosystems. So together, all three form the pillars of Valley Water's mission. And this is what our grant funding opportunities are based off of as well. Just to go a little further depth here about our programs. So the Grants and Partnership Program is funded through a voter approved ballot measure. It's called Safe Clean Water and Natural Flood Protection Program. And we have these priorities underneath the actual program that we'll go more in depth later on. But this program helps us leverage community resources, which are in the form of you all, our partners, so we can efficiently use them to help make sure we live up to our three pillars. We also try to increase collaboration and partnerships for our stewardship activities with cities, the county, nonprofit organizations, schools, and other community stakeholders. Moving on here to our a little further in depth about the program. As I mentioned before, this is a special tax or program. It's a special parcel tax that creates the funding source for grants. Last year, Santa Clara County voters approved Measure S, which renewed the Safe Clean Water Program, which originally was approved in 2012. This created about $47 million for the entire depth of projects. Funding for grants is one of the many projects included in the program. The other projects are also flood protection projects, capital projects, water conservation projects, and water supply projects. And so these are the 6 priorities. Some of you may remember that there were previously 5, and the quote unquote bingo numbers that we were using to identify each grant. Fortunately, this year, all the grants are being put underneath priority F. And so priority F is specifically F9. And there are 4 funding areas that we provide underneath F9, and that's the standard grants program, which we will hear more about today. The mini grants program, it's usually up to $5,000 and it's available year round. Our partnerships, and then as I mentioned earlier, the water bottle filling stations that's coming soon. So today we're talking about standard grants. They're a little different from the other ones in that they are high dollar amounts. They're available during an annual cycle. It's a competitive process, and then our board, our elected board, approves all the awards. All right, passing things back to Amy.
Great, thank you, Albert. So again, if you're a returning or current grantee, here's a quick list of what's new this year. As Albert mentioned earlier, we do have a new Safe Clean Water that was approved last year, which changed the grants program a little bit. So this year, all of the grant funding is consolidated into one pot, and there's no maximum or minimum per grant. The same grant project criteria is being carried forward in FY22 because this is a transition year. So if you are familiar with our prior program, we have the 5 project types, the bingo numbers that we that Albert had mentioned earlier. And there is no limit on the total amount per project that we have per grant type. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to, put in an application for 1.4 million. It's not likely to be approved. We are looking for a diversity in projects, but I'll get into that a little bit later. The projects will have a 5-year agreement term, where before it was a little bit shorter, but if your project ends up being shorter, that's great. But it is, we are giving 5 years. And we also announced the grant cycle back in December, if you caught that. And then we opened the applications in January, and they'll be due in March. So prior, we had a much shorter window, and we're hoping that with the extra time, you'll be able to put together a stronger application by doing research, filling out the criteria, and working to find partners and other funding sources with that time. Next slide. Okay, and so like I mentioned, we do have a total of 1.4 million available in standard grants. However, it's not likely that one project is going to be awarded 1.4 million. So keep that in mind. You'll want to be kind of realistic in your request. The Valley Water Board of Directors, as Albert mentioned, are the approvers of the awards, and they can award partial or full funding, depending on the scoring that you receive by our panelist. And not all projects that meet the minimum requirements will necessarily get awarded. It really depends on how many applications we get and the strength of the different applications. But we're hoping that you all apply, and we're hoping that you get awarded. And as I mentioned a little earlier, we are looking again for diversity in projects. We have bonus points, as I'll discuss later, for new grantees. And we're also looking for projects in different areas, locations, different sizes. So we're really looking to diversify the program moving forward. Next slide.
Amy, I'm sorry to interrupt. We just have a quick question that came up. The question is, for smaller grassroots nonprofits, will you allow a project advance to get the project going, then follow with reimbursements after the advance is spent?
Oh, that's a good question. And I will get to that a little later, but the quick answer is the standard grants are currently on a reimbursement basis. So we unfortunately can't provide advanced payment. We do offer that in our mini grant program, which we'll touch on a little bit later. And I'll go more into depth about the reimbursement. But the quick answer to that is no, it's reimbursement based at this time. Any other questions? All right, great. We'll have plenty of time too for Q&A towards the end. All right. Oh, yes, here we go. So we're ahead of the game here. Okay, so funds are provided again on a reimbursement basis. So what that means is that you would pay for staff, you would pay for supplies ahead of time, and then you would submit receipts to us to get reimbursed. So we would send you a check. And you can invoice, most grantees invoice quarterly, but some do invoice monthly. So do keep that in mind when you're putting together your budget and your project proposal. The final 10% of the award amount will be held if the project lasts longer. And let me step back. So a lot of grantees will have a project with a couple different funding sources. And sometimes Valley Water only funds a portion of that. So if the funds that we're giving to the project have run out, but the project isn't complete, we would withhold 10% retention until the project is completed. So you might want to keep that in mind too when planning your schedule. And lastly, our funds do have some restrictions. So the funds may not be used for pre-award costs. So that would be attending this webinar. It would be putting an application together. So those are the kind of things that we wouldn't be able to fund. Proprietary work, which the results cannot be released to the public. So if you're doing a research project, those results have to be provided publicly. And if that's going to be an issue for you, it may not, your project may not be eligible unless, because we are using public funds, it has to provide a public benefit. But again, if you're not sure how your project aligns with those funding requirements, feel free to reach out to us if you have individual questions. Happy to answer those.
We have another question that came up.
Sure.
The question is, if our nonprofit is not comfortable asking families and youth for their household income, can a proxy be used, such as percentage of students at a school eligible for free or reduced price lunch programs, or by census tracts?
Yes, definitely. And we'll get into the disadvantaged communities a little later, but the short answer is yes. And there is a similar question in the frequently asked questions, which is posted on our website. that goes into that. But yeah, if you are working with schools, we do consider Title I. That would be one demographic point. So good question.
Thank you for that. And we also have another question. For a smaller nonprofit that is not required by federal regulation to produce an audited financial statement annually, could a set of cash statements and balance sheets be used?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And we'll get into the requirements of the proposal. But to answer the question, if you're a small organizations, a lot of them don't have audited financials, so you should reach out to us because it may not be required in your case. Good question. Okay, time for tip number 1. All of the funding recommendations, the evaluation criteria, and the funding matrix and the eligibility, all of that information will be in the grant guidelines. So be sure to check that out. Here we're given an overview, but the fine print is in the grant guidelines. So really helpful document. And then again, we're always here to answer questions. Any other questions before I pass it on? And again, we'll have QA at the end too, and I'll go a little bit more into that on the application and project eligibility. Great, so I will go ahead and pass it on to Peggy.
Thanks, Amy. So next we have applicant eligibility. So if you're a new applicant, you might be wondering if you're eligible. Our grants are available to local agencies or municipalities, special districts, 501c3 nonprofits, a local nonprofit that has a fiscal sponsor or is affiliated with another nonprofit that possesses the 501c3 tax exempt status, schools, communities, community colleges or universities, whether public, not-for-profit or private. And then the last one is for-profit organizations are eligible, but this applies only to the water conservation research grants. Next slide. Project eligibility. So your project for your proposal, as long as it's located in Santa Clara County or serves a community group that's in Santa Clara County, demonstrates a match fund of at least 25% of the total project cost, whether monetary or in kind. So the in kind cost is usually the volunteer hours. As long as the project is completed within 5 years following the agreement effective date, and eligible applicants are able to seek grant funding for multiple projects as long as the project scope is different for each project. With that being said, only one grant will be awarded for each individual project. Next slide. Ineligible projects include feasibility studies, master planning, mitigation projects, projects designed to meet regulatory or permit obligations, operations and maintenance of existing projects or programs, and land acquisition, unless it's specifically deemed for use in habitat or species restoration or protection. Next slide. Well, here we have our grant application timeline for this grant cycle. Applications were opened on January 3rd, and we'll be accepting them through our Flux grants management system until March 4th at midnight. Between March 5th and April 15th, a panel of Valley Water and external subject matter experts will review and evaluate each grant proposal. Then in May, we'll be presenting the evaluated proposals and making the recommendations for the grant awards to the Valley Water Board of Directors for approval. Next slide. Then following the approval from the board, in June, we will send out the notice of award to all of the approved grantees. Between June and December, we'll begin drafting, reviewing, and executing the agreement for each grantee. And just to keep in mind, if you've been awarded, you won't be able to begin your project until we have an agreement in place. And the agreement execution time varies based on scope, secret review, permitting, and your ability to respond to any required follow-up documentation. And all of these requirements, Amy will talk about later on in the workshop. So I'll pass it back to Amy to talk about the project types.
Great. Thank you, Peggy. So now we're going to delve a little deeper into the different project types that we'll be accepting applications for. And for those of you who are not new to us, you'll again recognize some of these priority areas from prior grant cycles. We do have a list on our website if you want to see some examples of different projects that we've awarded in the past. So if you go to our website, valleywater.org/grants, and then go under standard grants, you'll see a list of past projects that have been awarded in the past. And I also want to mention there are 5 types. You may have some overlap. Projects that have benefits for all different projects types that could fall under a different project type, but you want to pick one because you'll be scored on the criteria for that one. So you'll want to go ahead and check out the criteria as you're putting it together and see which one is the best fit, because you'll pick one, and that one is the criteria that the panel will use to score your proposal. So I will start with water conservation research grants. So the intent of this type of grant is to identify water saving devices and strategies that can assist us, Valley Water, with its water conservation efforts. As you guys have all probably heard, the drought is big news, and we are really looking for different technologies and methods to help residents and organizations save water. So this could include developing water reduction devices, technologies, researching different cost-effective methods of saving water, or different activities that could save water, or developing an educational or outreach campaign or materials that help the community learn about conserving water. I want to stress this is mainly for research. If you take a look at the criteria for the water conservation and the grant guidelines, got it here, you'll see all of the criteria. So let's see with my background. Okay, well, you'll see all the criteria and you'll see how the scoring is going to be done. So take a look at that for water conservation. This is also not the same as the rebate program. So if you're looking for like residential rebates on replacing your lawn or drought tolerant landscaping, that's a different program. So feel free to reach out to us and we can send you information on that. But this is a different program. It's a grant program. And also want to note, as you'll see in the guidelines for this one, this is the only project type that is available for for-profit private entities. So everything else that you'll see after this is not available for for-profit organizations. So again, check out those grant guidelines. Next slide. All right, so just a quick example of a project that we've awarded in the past. And again, the project list of all the different projects, you'll see over 100 different types is on our website under the past projects list. So this is the MicroStreams Faucet adapter. So this is an adapter that requires less water to wash hands and stuff, and it ends up saving quite a bit of water. So what this grantee did, Volectron, they developed a residential water saving faucet adapter, so something that screwed onto the faucets that used only about 0.1 gallons per minute, which is about 13 times better than just running the regular faucet. So as you can imagine, it saved quite a bit of water, and they also provided a report that was shared with the community. So this is where that proprietary information is important, because it will be published publicly. So they saved on average 3,846 gallons of water per year per person that participated. So great project there. Next slide. And then another example is our dipper well replacement project with Fisher Nickel. So the dipper well, you see the little spoon holder there. So that is used in restaurants. You see them a lot, like in ice cream parlors, to constantly rinse the water to keep the utensils clean. So like the ice cream scoops and the spoons, and you'll see them in cafeterias and whatnot. Sounds like a small thing, but believe it or not, there are 100,000 dipper wells in California, and they use up to 500 gallons per year each day, which is pretty amazing. And so they study different replacement technologies, and they found that some of these more modern, high-tech dipper wells could save about 250 gallons per day. And the research on the 4 different dipper wells that they reviewed is available to the public and to other commercial food organizations to benefit from that. So you see kind of simple things, but big impact. So if you have an idea like that and you want to do a research and share that with your community, this might be a good type of project to investigate. All right, I'll go ahead and pass it on to Robert to talk about some of the other project types we have.
Thanks, Amy. So the next project area is pollution prevention grants, which was formerly known as B3. This type of area focuses on preventing contaminants and litter from entering our waterways and groundwater. Sample projects that have been funded in the past included the disposal of pharmaceuticals, auto products, gardening products, cleaning products, paints, light bulbs, batteries, and electronic waste. Other projects have initiated environmentally friendly gardening and composting techniques, and they have also provided public education to schools, communities, organizations about ways in which they could reduce contaminants in our waterways. Next slide, please. And so a great example of a project that we've helped fund in the past was with our grantee, the Regents of the University of California and UCCE, for their storage and composting of livestock manures project. So what the grantee had done was that they created 4 composting and demonstration sites in the county to educate participants about proper composting so that manure and contaminants from animal waste wouldn't enter the groundwater. They also did some pathogen research and testing to prove that their methods really did work and prevented toxins from entering the water waste. And we do have a little video that kind of showcased and highlights some of their key outcomes, which Albert will go ahead and play. Thank you for that. And yeah, this video is also posted on our Instagram account, and you could follow along there too and see other types of videos that have been funded. Up next, we have volunteer cleanups and education, which is formerly B7. This focuses on community volunteers, cleanups, and education. There might be some overlap between volunteer cleanup and pollution prevention, which is the previous program area that I just mentioned. One focuses more on preventing litter, while the other addresses litter that are already near the waterways, and also focuses on education. So if you're not sure whether or not which program area that your project might fall under, you could always check out the criteria and the standard grants guidelines to decide, or you could also reach out to us. So this doesn't have to be limited to one activity. You could do all the elements, activities in one project, and some sample projects that have been funded included providing education and outreach activities for clean, effective creeks and waterways, organizing cleanups with volunteers from local public schools, and developing and implementing curriculum around the relationship between water quality and riparian area health. And so an example of this was done with the Guadalupe River Park Conservancy, where this project included 3 different components. They did outreach and education to students from K to 12, and they also provided stipends to transport students to their event, which was called the Water Festival. And it also included the maintenance and installation of an aquarium. There's also a really beautiful mural underneath the Coleman Avenue Bridge that was also part of this project. Next slide, please. Another example is with agreement done with the city of Sunnyvale for their Schools Going Green project, where they worked with high school students to clean up more litter and cleanups around their school campuses and neighborhoods. The project also included student-led campaigns to change littering behavior, and it was also recognized as an outstanding stormwater project by the California Stormwater Quality Association. And again, more information about different past projects can be found on our website. It's just also providing the link in the chat. And then next slide, please. And then I'll go ahead and pass it off to Peggy.
Thanks, Robert. The next priority type we have is wildlife habitat restoration. That's formerly D3. And these are projects that support activities that create or enhance local habitat. Some sample projects include creating or enhancing wetland, riparian, and tidal marsh habitats, protecting special status species, removing fish migration barriers, installing fish ladders, and removing non-native invasive plant species, and also planting native species. Next slide. A sample project of this was done by San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory, and they're establishing Forster's Tern nesting sites project. For this project, they helped establish nesting sites for Forster's Tern at an Alviso Pond, in Alviso Pond, A16. The project reestablished nesting colonies on recently constructed islands using innovative technologies such as bird decoys and electronic call systems. And you can see in the picture on the right, those are actually bird decoys. Next slide. And then the next type of project is access to trails and open space. And these sample projects of this includes construction of the bridge linking 2 trails together, creation of a trail that provides a significant link to the Creekside Trail Network, or activities that support urban trails and encourage community involvement. Next slide. And the sample project of this is one that was done by the County of Santa Clara for their Calero Reservoir Oak Cove Trail construction. And this constructed a new 5-mile trail in Calero Reservoir. Next slide. Another example project was done by Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District for the Webb Creek Bridge. And they constructed a new service bridge over Webb Creek in the Bear Creek Redwoods Open Space Preserve. This bridge now facilitates a trail connection between the Lexington Basin and Skyline and ensures emergency service access throughout the preserve. Next slide. I'll pass it over to you, Albert.
All right, great. Thank you, Peggy. So we're moving on to some of the criteria elements. So one thing you'll know is that, or you should know, is that the staff, our team does not decide who gets the grants and don't get the grants. It's actually done by a review of subject matter experts. They evaluate your application and then they make recommendations to our board of directors. Scoring is done by on a funding allocation matrix. You can kind of see at the bottom there. It's also in your grant guidelines, and so definitely take a look at it. It's not a secret. Everything's there in that grant guideline. You'll see the different minimum requirements and the evaluation criteria. So make sure you look at each priority type to see how that's being evaluated. As mentioned earlier, there are some bonus criteria and one involving disadvantaged communities. We award bonus points for financial stability. So this is when more than half of your projects require matching funds are actually coming from a monetary source. To us, that demonstrates a strong financial ability to care for the project. We also award bonus points for first-time standard grant recipients. This doesn't mean if you were a mini grant recipient before that you wouldn't count for this. This is actually just only standard grants as a first-time recipient. And then as asked earlier on the environmental justice or disadvantaged community topic, we do require award bonus points for environmental justice. And this is projects that serve or impact disadvantaged communities. A little deeper dive into that, we have 3 ways of looking at those communities. Our board recognizes 3 overall methods for defining disadvantaged communities. One of them is low-income households. And we base this off of incomes below 80% of the area median income in the county. As mentioned earlier, we also count low-income census tracts. So these are the census tracts that are where the aggregated household income is less than 80% of the area median income for the county. And there is a map provided by the county where you can kind of type in the address of the project area and see if it falls in one of these income census tracts. A third way we do look at it is as an area defined by the California Environmental Protection Agency. They have a map and a scoring system that they use, and so there's a link for that as well. So if you fit into one of these criteria, we will award you the bonus points for that. All right, back to Amy.
Question
Oh,
that
sure.
came up in the chat. So the question reads, understanding that we have to apply under a single priority category, if there's overlap and we can, in the scope of a single project, address 2 categories, how should we express that in our narrative?
It's my understanding that you'll pick the one that most fits your project the best, and then you cater your narrative towards that priority as best you can. And we do understand there's probably some overlap with these projects. I know, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, that our future program may account for this integrated type of benefit.
Yeah, and you'll see in the criteria that there is overlap in some of them. For example, in the pollution prevention and the support volunteer cleanups, you can have a lot of different elements in one project. So like for the example, the Schools Going Green, that was a pollution prevention project. They had an educational component, they had a community cleanup and school cleanup component, and then they had a campaign where they were showing the community how to prevent pollution. So if you're not sure, I would recommend, one, that you look at the different guidelines between the 2. You'll see in the guidelines, you'll see like different line items. So that's the different criteria that will be scored. And if after going through that, you're still unsure, you can always schedule an appointment with us and we can help you kind of talk through your project. We can't tell you, whether you'd get awarded one way or another because we don't make that decision. We can't review your application, but we can advise. And so if you find that you're kind of struggling which one and you're not finding your answer in the criteria, then feel free to reach out. Great. And sorry. Wanted to mention those frequently asked questions are also on our website. And there's some information on the disadvantaged communities in there, as well as the guidelines.
And fortunately for you, it's your turn for your next slide.
All right, cool. Thank you. So right now we'll go a little bit more deep into the proposal requirements, what's required, and then once you're awarded, if you are awarded, the requirements to get your agreement together and your project going. Okay, so when you go into, when you're getting ready to apply, go into Flux, you can make an account right now, and you can see the application and you can save it as you go. But you'll see there are different requirements in there and a series of questions. So you want to make sure that you answer the questions thoroughly because those are part of the score. And again, the application does need to be submitted through Flux. And in that Flux application, you'll also be providing additional documentation. So one will be the project scope, the schedule and the budget, which we'll go over a little later, a resolution from a governing body. So if you have a board, then you will need a resolution from that board. And there is an example in the grant guidelines of text that you can use. It's also on our website. If you're not sure if your organization has a governing body or whether or not you'll be required to have a resolution, please contact us because we can help you figure that out. Don't let that deter you. Your 501c3 determination letter, or if you're working with another nonprofit that's going to serve as the applicant, then we would need their letter. Your W-9 form, your Form 990 for those nonprofits, audited financial statements. So somebody had a question about that earlier. So if you do have them, I would provide them. But if you don't, reach out again, and we can help you figure out whether or not that would be required. Your organizational budget, and then the resume of key staff. So the key staff that'll be working on the project. There are templates and resources available on our website, valleywater.org/grants. Go under standard grants. You'll see templates, the frequently asked questions, the guidelines, just all kinds of information. You can even schedule an appointment with us through the website. And again, don't forget to fill out the questions. Sometimes grantees forget to focus on answering those. Next slide. Okay, so the first element would be the project scope. So a good scope would include the project summary. So the goals of the project, just basic information, the location of the project, whether it's a specific location or countywide, you'll want to be pretty detailed in where that'll be. Some grantees attach maps or screenshots. You can do that as well. The community served and demographics. So, if you're in a disadvantaged community, you want to mention that. If you're serving different communities, you want to mention that. Student populations. If it's a Title I school, provide that information. And then any project partners. So if you'll be working with another nonprofit or government agency, you'll want to mention that. And you'll also probably want to mention if you have any other grants from any other organizations. You want to include the project tasks. So those will be kind of the nuts and bolts of your agreement later down the line. We'll want to know your approach for completing the project and meeting your goals. Subtask. The metrics, so how would you measure whether or not your project met its goal or is successful, and then the deliverables, so what'll come out of the project. So one example of a deliverable for like an educational project would be the lessons plans, if that's what the grant funded. And another example would be if you're doing like a mural or something, then the mural. You'll also want to think about the future of the project. The grant funding is to create a project, and which is all fine and good, but we want to know, will the project live on? Is it sustainable? So if you're doing an educational campaign, will you be sharing the curriculum with other teachers? Where do you envision it going? If you're doing like a planting, who's going to take care of the plants? Who's going to do the maintenance? So be kind of detailed in that. And then your project team. And you can provide a narrative summary of that, or some resumes. I've seen different things. So again, be sure to read those guidelines. That's really going to help you put together a really good scope and to help you get all the points that you can. So you don't want to leave any points on the table. So be sure to go through that. And again, like I said, this will be part of your agreement. So once awarded, we'll work with you to maybe fine tune a couple of these things, but that'll be your project and that'll be part of your agreement. Another thing I'd like to note, given the uncertain times, COVID is a big thing, or any other unforeseen future variables in your project. It's perfectly acceptable to do alternative tasks. So let's say you're doing an educational program and your plan is to do an event, a public event. And but if you're not sure how things are going to look with COVID, you can always put an alternative, which would be like an online event or like a self-guided tour or something like that as an alternative to meet the same goal of educating the public. So if you're not sure about that, again, you can reach out to us. Next slide. Okay, so tip number 2, again, read those guidelines. They're really going to help you, and that's what your project's going to be evaluated on. The evaluators can only go off of the grant criteria for your project. Next slide.
We have a question that came in the chat.
Sure.
The question reads, murals are difficult to collect data for besides social media. Do you have metrics for impact on murals?
Yeah, it kind of depends on where the mural is and who the target audience is. But like when we've had them do murals in school, sometimes it's surrounded or it's accompanied by educational materials. So they'll do the students to see how much they've learned before and after. Maybe Peggy has an example. Do you have an example of a deliverable for a mural?
Yeah, it is related to an elementary school, but the outcome that was measured for that was getting testimonials from the students, and then even having them like redraw the mural to see like what stuck out in there, what they remembered from their trip to the mural. But I think even like collecting data from social media, that's a good metric too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We had another grantee too. It wasn't murals, but it was educational signage. And they put those little scanners where you could scan it with your cell phone and it would take them to a survey. And so that was kind of a creative way to measure success and community engagement with the mural. Any other questions about the scope? And again, we have templates and samples, so check that out on our website. And then the frequently asked questions is also a good guide. Okay, so project schedule. So the important thing to remember here is to make sure that the task, so you have task 1, 2, and 3 is the same as in the schedule. Task 1, 2, and 3 is the same as in the budget, so that they're all aligned. You want to be realistic. So, you know, if you're going to be building something and you need to do CEQA and you need to do permitting, you're not likely going to finish it in 3 months. So you'll need to figure out, you know, what's a realistic estimate on time. You may need to shift things as well based on when the agreement is executed and you've met all the required contract requirements, so like insurance and stuff. But I would assume that you likely won't be able to start until, I would say, like September, December of 2022. If you're not sure or that's a concern for you, feel free to reach out to us. Again, you can schedule an appointment. We're happy to kind of talk through things. And you can use any format you want. We do have a template, but it's really up to you how you want to put that together. Some grantees will do like a starting point, and then rather than putting like the months that they'll complete each task, they'll do like from the start date, we'll finish task 1 3 months after the start date, and then we'll finish task 2 3 months after task 1. So seen a lot of different things. If things shift, that's okay. Your agreement will be good for 5 years. But we do kind of want to see what your timeline is. Next slide.
We have a quick question about CEQA.
Mhm.
Do light duty litter cleanup projects along creeks, not inside the creeks, qualify for an exemption?
A lot of times they do, but only a CEQA planner can make that determination. So it still will need to be, every project will need to be kind of reviewed by a CEQA planner, but some require like a little bit more in depth, and I'll get a little bit into that a little later. But that's a good question.
And I think, Amy, this also depends on the scale of your cleanup. You might want to also explore mini grants if it's like a smaller scale cleanup versus a larger scale effort. So you want to scale it to the right grant program, I guess you can say.
Yeah, and I'll explain a little later, but there are so many different variables in the CEQA that it's kind of hard to give a generic answer. But for the most part, for the cleanups I've seen, they do get an exemption. But again, I can't make that determination. Any other questions? That was a good one. Okay. All right, if you could go back one slide. There we go, cool. Okay, so again, just like the schedule, you want to make sure that the scope and the schedule and the project budget all align with each other. You want to do a realistic estimate. So the budget and the schedule are both included in the review criteria. So if you inflate your budget and we have a subject matter expert, they may ding you, I don't know, but you'll want to be realistic. The other thing too is once awarded, we will not increase the award amount. So if the project ends up costing more than you initially thought, Valley Water won't be able to provide additional funding. So you'd have to find funding elsewhere or provide that yourselves. So be careful when you're putting your budget together. You want to be realistic, do your research, call and get different quotes on things, and really think about what you'll need for the project. You want to include any contributions that you're receiving. You are required to have a 25% match. So that means that the Valley Water grant can only fund 75% of the total project costs or less. But you can use what we call in kind to help you meet that 25% match. So in kind can be anything that you're bringing to the table. You are a partner. That includes volunteer hours. We see a lot of that in our cleanup projects. So there is a website, if you look at the facts, the frequently asked questions, that will tell you the value of a volunteer hour in California. Last time I looked, it was about $32 an hour. So that could be considered match. Or if you have equipment that you already own, or you're going to be borrowing something from another agency. So those would be in kind. There's more of a description of in kind in the grant guidelines and on the frequently asked questions. So go ahead and check those out. And 80% of the funding has to go towards implementation. So again, we can't fund planning projects or CEQA, but if your project does have some of those elements, permitting, that aren't implementation. So implementation would be like construction or the actual activity. We can only provide up to 20% for pre-implementation costs. So like CEQA and permitting and studies.
We do have a follow-up question regarding the CEQA. And they're just asking if it's through the county planning or is that Valley Water's internal department?
It depends on who's going to be the lead agency. So if you are a government agency, I don't think I saw anybody, maybe some educational institutions, they'll serve as the lead. But if you're a nonprofit, most likely Valley Water would serve as the lead. So we would, if you're not sure, you can always reach out to us and we can kind of help you figure that out. But for most nonprofits, we serve as the lead agency. All right, next slide. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen. I'm just going to show you really quick a sample budget using the template. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. So you'll see Influx a template. And so what you're going to be doing is putting your project budget together. So you'll look at like personnel services. So for example, this is a cleanup project. They have a supervisor, an admin, and an intern. So we can fund staffing, staff hours. So they provided the hourly rate. How many hours are going to be dedicated to this project to get an amount? There are formulas in this budget template, so be careful not to clear anything out. If you're struggling, let me know, and we may be able to answer some of your administrative questions regards to this. So you'll total all that up. We do allow up to 20% benefit. And so you'll get a total. So the total for this project for the supervisor is $23,400. And then we have the admin, which is about $13,000, and then the total personnel costs. So then you want to drill down deeper to see how much of that cost are you providing? Do you have other project contributions? So that would be a grant or a partner, but if not, then you would leave this blank. And then how much of these costs are you asking for Valley Water to provide? So for example, we have $48,000 in personnel cost. The grantee is going to cover 16, their partner is going to cover 16, and so they're asking Valley Water for $16,000 towards personnel services. And then you would provide other costs. So we have like garbage pickers. So that each garbage picker, they estimate is about $10.99 per item. They're going to need about 50 garbage pickers. And so we have a total of $549 for the project garbage pickers. So that's the total. And then you'll break it down by who's going to fund it. So the grantee is going to cover 183. Their partner is going to cover 183. So they're going to be asking Valley Water for 183. And then here we have that volunteer time. So this is in kind. So this is one way to provide match. So this, just as a sample, it's $24, but it's more if you look at the California rate. And then you'll provide that. And so they're saying that the contribution is $4,800. And also their partner is going to be providing funding. So then you get a project total. So the total for the project, the grantee is going to provide 67, their partner is going to provide 20. So they're going to be asking Valley Water for 19,000 towards this project. And that number you'll want to match in your application in Flux. So be sure to do that. And you want to make sure that your project contributions are at least 25% for the match. Okay, so then for everything that you're asking Valley Water for, so they're asking 16,000 in personnel costs, how much, we want you to drill down by task. So they have these 4 different tasks that they're going to be doing. Task 1, planning, implementation, cleanup. So how do the staff hours fall per task? So you see they kind of broke it up even. So they're going to be spending about 3,000 on planning, about 3,900 on task 2 to get your totals down here. So that was really quick. It's a complex sheet. And again, if you need help, let us know. But again, the main things to remember are we're asking for total project costs, and then we're asking you to break it down by who's going to provide funding for those project costs, and then breaking it down further for how you're, for the Valley Water funding, how you're going to break that up per task. Do we have questions about the budget?
We have one question that came in. Where should we put contracted services or personnel would we would contract with to administer the grant?
Okay.
Yeah.
So if they're a consultant or contracted, usually we see it under other costs. Usually personnel services are for the grantee staff or a grantee partner. So it's very clear because a lot of consultants have a markup and they'll send in an invoice for a flat amount like $2,000, where for an employee, we've been looking at like salary and benefits according to what you included in your budget. So I would put that down here under other costs if you're planning on having a contract for a set amount. But if you're going to be paying them hourly, then probably you would want to put them up here. We do also allow 10% overhead, so in addition to the salary. So yeah, we have a range of projects. We have, small projects and large projects. So feel free to reach out if you don't feel like any of this really fits your organization. We can help you, guide you. Another question in there?
Just to follow up to that one, they're just mentioning that it is an hourly charge for admin.
Yeah, then I would probably put them here, and then you want to include the benefits and stuff. So that means when it comes down to invoicing, you'll need to provide the time cards or some kind of wage proof. Okay, that was a lot of information. So we went over that really quickly. And again, we're here to help you if you have any questions. All right. So Albert,
Just a quick one. So just another clarifying response to that one.
Mm-hmm.
They said that it's not an employee, there are no benefits, and it's just a contract.
It's a contract. Okay, then for the benefits, you would probably put 0, but if you're paying them per hour, like as a temp, you probably want to put them in personnel. I think in your case, maybe you want to reach out to us so we can talk a little bit more about your project. Good question, though.
Just want to make sure I have the right screen up. Is it the PowerPoint?
We are on, yes, that's the correct one. Okay. Okay. So some other requirements for each project would be the CEQA review, which I'll talk about a little bit about each of these in a bit. Permit review, we'll need insurance and the proper endorsements, and we'll need that completed scope, schedule, and budget if you are awarded. Next slide. All right, environmental compliance. Valley Water must comply with the California Environmental Quality Act. So if you've heard the word CEQA, that's what it stands for. And CEQA requires that Valley Water analyze a project's potential environmental impact. And CEQA is complete when the lead agency has filed for a notice of determination or upon documentation that the project qualifies for an exemption. So somebody had asked earlier who would qualify as the lead agency, and it really depends on your partners and your project. But if you are a nonprofit, it's most likely going to be us, but you can always reach out to us to confirm. But if you're a city or a government agency, or you're working with a government agency, it might be the government agency. CEQA can be pretty complex, so feel free to reach out. So in your application, you should provide any CEQA documents that you have. And again, we have a lot of different types of projects. So reach out if you find that you are not sure in your case. But if you've started studies, if you're working with another lead agency, or you are a lead agency and you've already started your CEQA review, include that. You want to provide as much detail as possible on the project location and access routes, any species or habitats that could be affected, if you know. ground disturbing activities. So that could include like digging or drilling. We'd want to know that. The schedule, the work schedule. So sometimes, you know, the different season will affect different animals and plants, or any other potential environmental concerns that may exist. CEQA is part of the scoring in most projects. So check out the grant criteria. And then again, you want to provide as much detail as possible, because if you've already started some of the CEQA work, even if it's not completed, you may get more points for that. If CEQA is done, congratulations, send that in. If it's not, and you haven't even started, that's okay. You can still apply. It doesn't need to be completed, but it may help with your total score if you're a little further along. And then if you provide more information, that'll help our CEQA planners review your project a little quicker. And just to note, only a CEQA planner can determine that. Unfortunately, none of us are CEQA planners. And believe it or not, the size and the cost of the project isn't necessarily indicative of the CEQA review. Each project is unique. But again, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about that. Next slide. Oh, yeah, and next slide. Sorry. Yeah, okay, so as I mentioned, CEQA is maybe part of the scoring for your project type, so do include any of that information if you have it, but a CEQA review is not required to apply. Any questions related to CEQA? Great. Okay, next slide, permit, okay. In addition to CEQA, your project may require a permit. And we require that the grantee has all the proper permits before starting work. Our project activities that would require a permit on privately owned property, publicly owned property, or Valley Water owned property. Applicants, similar to CEQA, who can show progress in obtaining permits if they need them, will be given more points based on the grant guidelines, so check that out. And if you need more information on permitting, please reach out. But there are sometimes some projects you'd be surprised that require a permit. What comes to mind is cleanups. Sometimes you'll need an encroachment permit for that. So it may be on private property, but if another agency has an easement on it, you may need a permit. So if you've started to work on that, feel free to include that information. You don't need a permit to apply, but you will, if a permit is determined that it's required, then you would need that before you start work.
And Amy, it's worth mentioning that if they do need a permit from one of our property access, that the permit fee would be waived.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Yeah, so you can even reach out now if you want. You know, if you think you need a permit to our permitting unit, so community project review unit. We have a link, I believe, on our webpage. If not, we're going to put one soon. It's also in the frequently asked questions, but you can even call and ask if you want to do a little homework. But again, it's not required to apply. All right, next slide. Yeah, and if you have already started work on that, go ahead and include that, whether that's like email, like, oh, we've already reached out to the city, or oh, we've already reached out to Valley Water, we have an application in, or we have an inquiry in. You want to provide as much information as you can. Next slide. Thank you, Robert. All right, I'll go ahead and pass it on to Robert.
Thank you, Amy. So next requirement is insurance. So we do require that the grantee maintains the insurance for the entirety of the project. And we want to make sure that your insurance documents are in compliance with the standard grant guidelines. And so a list of these requirements are in the guidelines as attachment 4. So you could go ahead and take a look at that now, and you could also send it in to your broker to determine like how long it will take, and like the different quotes and how it could fit into your budget. We do want to like also remind that we can't start work on the project or the agreement without the insurance approved by Valley Water. And different projects may require different insurance requirements, and so some of them may be adjusted on a case-by-case basis. Next slide. All right. And once again, grant applications are currently open and active, and they are due by March 4th, 2022. You can go ahead and start creating your profile now on our Flex, our grants management system called Flex. You could register and create your user profile. Instructions to do this are in attachment 1 in the standard guidelines. And if you're having a hard time with any of the questions or any technical difficulties, you could always reach out to us for assistance, and we'd be more than happy to help you through getting familiar with Flex. Next slide. And I'll pass it on to Peggy for some important reminders.
Is there the important closing reminders? Just to read the grant guidelines and, put together your proposal based on everything that's in the grant guidelines. And then, submitting the final application through Flux. We also have the frequently asked questions that's available as a resource as you're putting together your proposal. And then also just a reminder that no proposals will be accepted after the due date. So nothing will be accepted on March 5th. And a tip would be to get in your application early or get started on it early, so that if you do run into any issues or have any questions, there's still time for you to schedule a meeting with us or reach out to us, and we can help you navigate that question. Next slide. So yeah, that's the final tip. Tip number 3 is to thoroughly read and follow the grant guidelines to ensure a complete application and great proposal. Next slide. So I want to talk more about other grant opportunities that we have. We also have the mini grant program, and that program is available year round. So applications are open now, and that's for up to a funding of up to $5,000 per project. And these are meant for smaller scale projects to provide seed funding to encourage community engagement in activities that covers all the priorities that we discussed earlier on. It can also be used as a secondary funding source to larger projects. The mini grant program does have a streamlined application, and it differs from the standard grants in that the reimbursement, it's not reimbursement based, and we actually cut the check 50% of the funds up front, and then you receive the remaining 50% after completing the project and submitting your final report. And we also have the water bottle filling stations grants, and that's coming very soon. And that is also $5,000 per project, and that's going to be for water bottle filling stations, at your school or at any location that provides public access. So yeah, just if you signed up for our email notifications, you'll be hearing about that opportunity soon. I'll turn it back over to Amy.
Great. I think Robert had a quick announcement.
Yeah.
Before that, there's a question in the Q&A, by the way.
Yeah. The question reads, or in regards to 10% overhead cap with the budget, is that on the amount requested from Valley Water or on the total project amount plus the match?
total project amount. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and add some of the links in the chat for our contact information, links to the websites that folks can refer to, and also a way to schedule a meeting with our team if to have a more closer and in-depth question and answers if you have any of that. But before we close out, I just want to make one quick announcement that Valley Water is offering paid summer internships. And so if you all know any college students or graduate students who are interested in making a difference in the community and working with Valley Water is offering these paid summer internship programs for different majors like business, human resources, graphic design, environmental planning. I'll go ahead and drop the link to get more information about that in the chat.
I think, what's the application period, Robert? I think it's opening very soon and it's like for a week only.
Yeah, it is currently, it will open from January 24th of this month to January 31st. And included in the link will show different information sessions that folks can attend along with the Zoom link. And I'll go ahead and drop that link in the chat. There is a question that's asking about internships for high school students. Anyone?
Yeah, I actually have that information. Currently, we only offer high school internships if you're a part of a certain program. It's not available to all high school students. And the program has been on hold for 2 years and it's not active right now. So right now we don't have any summer internships available for high schoolers. We do have the Youth Commission. We do have the Youth Commission and applications for that will reopen in May for the next cohort. And then we also have, I think, the Job Shadow Day coming up in February that high school students are encouraged to attend. And I'll find the link for the Job Shadow Day and post it in the chat.
Yeah, we have a really cool summer internship program. They get to do all kinds of cool, fun things. They even sometimes get to work on grants. So it's a really cool program. So if you know any college students, I would highly recommend they check it out because we have a lot of different things like Robert said. All right, so I just wanted to thank you all for joining us today. We know that it's late and it's dinner time, but we are here to answer any questions. We'll hang on. Again, we do have those frequently asked questions and all those resources on our website. We have another webinar coming up, I believe in 2 weeks. It's on our website. So if you know of anybody who could be interested in our program, feel free to pass that information along. This recording will also be posted on our website. Again, feel free to call or email us if you have any questions particular to your project or you're not sure, if you're required to submit some kind of documentation based on your organization. And you can also use Calendly to schedule an appointment. That's on our website, so you can click the link and it'll let you make an appointment right then and there. Again, we can't review any applications ahead of time, just for full transparency, but we are happy to provide any advising. And it's really up to the panel and the board to decide whether or not the project is awarded. So again, thanks again for spending your evening with us, and we'll hang out to answer any questions that you have.
There's actually a question that came up. So they would like more clarification on the indirect costs. And they've also said indirect costs on the budget form are limited to 10% on personnel only.
Yeah, on personnel.
I believe, yeah.
So I mean, it's the total project, but in the personnel area, it's 10% of that. I think that's the clarification that's being asked.
Yeah. So it's 10% of the personnel costs you can, including salary and benefits. So if you have a consultant, like if you're hiring a contractor, you can't put a 10% markup on that, but you could on staff indirect costs.
Also invite Margaret to unmute herself if she wants to
Sure.
chat about it.
Hi.
Margaret, I enabled your microphone, so if you want to unmute, we can probably get a better idea of what you may be asking.
Oh, okay, thanks. No, I was just a little confused because earlier someone asked if the indirect was going to be calculated on total direct costs, and you said yes. And then I was confused because the budget form says it's to be calculated only on personnel costs.
Yes, sorry, I must have misunderstood their question. It is only for personnel costs.
Okay, and according to federal regulations, if a contract is under $25,000, indirect can be calculated on that. So I'm assuming as long as the hourly contractor in the personnel line is less than 25,000, indirect could be calculated on their amount as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. If you wouldn't mind, could you email that and then we'll double check
Okay.
on that. But we do have, I mean, we're not a federal, it's not a federal grant program, so I'm not sure if we're beholden to the same rules. I haven't really seen personnel cost exceed 25,000, so that hasn't been an issue that we've run into, but I guess in theory that could be. So if you wouldn't mind, that would be great if you could email us and then we can do a little research for you. That's a good question.
All right, thanks very much. You'll probably hear from me on permit questions anyway.
Oh, good. We love permit questions.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Are we also going to drop a link for the survey?
Yes. Thank you, Peggy.
Oh, thanks,
If you,
Robert.
I don't know if people are still here. Yes. Okay.
There we are.
Yeah. If you wouldn't mind when we're done here, taking the survey, I'll also be emailing it out in a bit. But that'll help us improve our workshop. So let us know what you liked, what you didn't like. If there was any information that was missing or incomplete, we're happy to get that feedback so that we can improve the workshop for our grantees.
And if you want to ask your question verbally, just raise your hand and I'll enable your microphone. Or we can do a staring contest too, that can work.
Yeah. Oh, we have a first-time applier. Yeah, my advice is don't get overwhelmed by all of these technical questions. Like I said, we have a diverse group of projects, anywhere from like super complex construction to like grassroots educational events. So every project has different needs as far as like CEQA and permitting. So don't let that deter you because we can help you with that. Also give a plug for the mini grants that's available year round. If you're not sure you're ready for like a standard grant, then maybe start with a mini grant and the application is a lot simpler.
Question in the chat. I think Yulin asked, does the applicant have to live in the area? I live in Fremont. Would I qualify? I think we mentioned it earlier, but go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So no, the organization or if you're applying for a water conservation research grant, you don't need to be a resident of Santa Clara County, but the benefit has to be towards Santa Clara County. So that means that the work has to be done in Santa Clara County or the research has to be done in Santa Clara County.
And we have a hand raised from Margaret again. Go ahead, Margaret. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Sorry.
There you go.
I'm glad you brought up the subject of mini grants. I just wanted to clarify. It says that the scope of work could be on a project basis. So for example, if one project might be on a school grounds to install stormwater retention or bioswales, and another project might be a creek cleanup with students, would that qualify as two separate projects that could be applied for by one organization?
Yeah, to me, it sounds like two different projects. And if, again, you can always reach out to us. We can chat with you about your specific ideas. But yeah, it has to be two separate projects, but they can be two projects that are at the same location, potentially. Do you have anything to add?
I was just trying to think, as long as the scope of work is very defined and not overlapping, right?
Yeah, it has a start and an end. The other thing we can't fund is like program maintenance. So like if you have a project or a program that already exists and you're just hoping to keep it moving along and pay for some staffing costs, really the intent is for a project. And if you look at the frequently asked questions, there's a little bit more detail in that. But yeah,
Okay.
defined end, defined scope.
Thank you.
Okay, last call for questions. We're here if you have them. But again, you can always reach out. All right, we'll go ahead and sign off then. Thank you, everybody. Bye.